From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Well, I think we'll probably get started. It's just wonderful to see everybody here tonight, and very excited to have a chance to talk right now, and then to have it segue into what we hope will be a very exciting concert very soon after that. I'm Nicholas Kitchen, first violinist of the Borromeo Quartet and faculty at New England Conservatory. And of course, I have the honor of sharing a short time and helping us all look a little more closely at the music of and the life of, and any other questions, I suppose, of really someone who, for me and for us, we just feel so lucky to have had the chance to work with, and that is Gunther Schuller. Because, of course, no matter what, 500 years from now, these notes that are on a page, they have their life in them and will continue to have their life in them. But what a privilege to actually work within the hearing of the person who actually created these works. And what we're going to do right now is talk a little bit about the Fourth String Quartet. And that is a string quartet that our quartet has worked very, very closely with Mr. Schuller on. We're going to be playing it in the concert very shortly. And we also recently worked quite hard on a record of this work together, which is interesting in some respects because not only does it join GM recordings, which has for a long time made so many great recordings, but also what our quartet's done, something called Living Archive. And it joined together a few other concepts too, where in fact on this disc there's a live performance in Jordan Hall in Boston. And then, from a couple weeks later, the efforts that went into an edited performance. And of course, we all worked very hard together on the coaching, the preparation, the editing, and every aspect of that. And I just can't tell you what a rich experience it has been to delve so deeply into every detail of what makes the piece live and what the substance is that holds it together.
That idea of having a string quartet on a CD recording in two different forms, one as a live performance and one as a studio recording, that's, I think, almost unprecedented. I insisted on it because the Borromeo Quartet has played so many, as you just heard, performances of these pieces. Some of them have been just magical in their, well, in every respect, in their understanding of the music, the beauty of the playing, the perfection, and a kind of thing that we musicians know we usually cannot necessarily get in a studio. We can get another kind of perfect performance, perfect in quotes, but there's something that happens also because of the reaction or the participation of the audience, which may be silent and quiet, but there's something happening in a kind of, you know, back and forth. So all in that recording, that live recording, I include the great acoustics in Jordan Hall, the New England Conservatory, as being a participant in that great magical performance. So I insisted on it, and I think no record company has ever done that.
So far as I know,
so,
that's right.
And it's an interesting comparison, you know, but so.
And of course, the fact that we're mentioning New England Conservatory, it has turned out very happily that my life, the life of the Borromeo Quartet, and a tremendous institution that Mr. Schuller really transformed a little bit before we arrived there, was the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston. And it's very interesting, I suppose. I mean, as I see it from the outside, there was such an initiative started when you were president of the school, which said that, you know, there's nothing that we must delve into all the details of the tradition as it's been handed down for generations and not neglect any part of that. but that there's a tradition that's happening right now, or right then and right now, which is a vital way of making music, which became what was called the third stream, and jazz, and of course what's interesting right now is at the conservatory, at New England Conservatory, I think that tree that was planted then is absolutely flourishing. It's just wonderful. And amazingly, you know, I'm a violin teacher at the conservatory. I have one jazz violinist in my class and one contemporary improvisation violinist in my class, and we work on Bach together. And we also work on trying to imitate the glissandi of Billie Holiday, and we work on various aspects which will help them be more in command of the art that they're pursuing. And their main focus is, of course, to develop their ability in jazz working.
I should add immediately, this string quartet has nothing to do with jazz or third stream. That's good. Because that happens, I remember I used to get a lot of reviews in the New York Times where absolutely purely classical pieces, no jazz element, because I was famous for this third stream, bringing jazz and classical music together. There must be jazz in there. Well, there wasn't. I have always kept it separate. Some are classical pieces, pure and simple. Then there are jazz pieces, pure and simple, and then there's the amalgamation of the two in the so-called third stream. But anyway.
I do remember feeling very lucky. Within our quartet, we were asked to be part of two different projects with Mr. Schuller, one of which, I think it was just me that was part of it, but it was a recording of Brahms' First Symphony and Beethoven's Fifth Symphony.
Oh, back then, oh yes, yeah.
And I do remember, I think, that the first violin section of that assembled group was almost 100% first violinists of string quartets that were active at that time. It was quite a get-together, I remember.
Well, and one has to add to that, that was unusual because string quartet players, many string quartet do not perform in orchestral recordings. They just don't. They even sometimes think it will sort of contaminate their reputation or whatever, you know, mere orchestra player, you know. But whatever it is, but I through my friendships with all of them, they all ended, including you. My God, I was thrilled. And the rest were all concert masters.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I don't know.
And then the other experience that we got to join together with you with was on the other side of things, which was with Joe Lovano. And I think your son, maybe both your sons were involved in a Carnegie Hall concert. I remember one of the pieces was a jazz piece, but it was a sort of what it's called in other contexts a crab canon, where it was the same forward and backwards, and then a couple of other
palindrome.
And those were
So, well.
But now we have this piece in front of us for tonight. We have it. Fortunately, we have it set up so everyone can see elements of the score and look at it. What do you think would be interesting to share with people?
Well, the first thing I want to mention is that the dedication of this piece, it's one of the more complex dedications ever, I think. And I want to mention it particularly here because what it says here, in memory of Felix Gallimir and in honor of Alan and Cecilia Sands, it's not the end of it, commissioned for the Philadelphia Chamber Music Society. So it has sort of three aspects of it. The reason I mention it, because Felix Gallimir has a connection to the Library of Congress and the Stradivarius collection here, because his, brother-in-law, Louis Krasner, is the one who steered so many of the great Stradivarius violins to Mrs. Whitehall for the collection. And of course, Felix, beyond that, as a famous, adored teacher, was at Marlborough for 800 years, and the most beloved teacher. And Mr. Sands, who has an art gallery in New Orleans, who then commissioned the work, financial terms, through the Philadelphia Chamber Music Society. He's in this because he and Gallimir were neighbors. They lived in the same apartment house, and one of the interesting things that I was asked to do, it'll come up a little bit later, was that Mr. Sands requested of me, because his favorite, and Felix Gallmer's favorite composer was Mozart. It's true of many people besides them. Therefore, he would like me to do some kind of reference or allusion to Mozart. And, but then he got very specific, because maybe you can help me remember.
Yeah,
it had
sure.
something to do with the house numbers or the apartment numbers, and yet it should connect up with some music of Mozart's. And it took, I mean, I first thought, this is a crazy idea, you know, 12 and 13 or 12 and 27 or whatever. And eventually I found, and I also wanted it to be some kind of a special Mozart piece. And it took me about 3 weeks to find an amazing, I think it was the 5th Symphony or the 7th Symphony of Mozart.
Yeah, so the address was 225 East 74th Street in New York City.
Yeah.
And the Mozart that eventually became part of the piece was the symphony in B-flat K22, 22.
Yeah.
So which I suppose
I couldn't get closer than that. That's a ridiculous idea to begin with, you know. But then, of course, I wanted to make sure that it was really, you know, as talented as Mozart was, obviously, some of those early symphonies are, you know, there's some that are better than others. And I found this amazing statement in the beginning of that symphony, which is almost like Beethoven, but we'll get to that
okay,
a little,
we'll get to it later.
little bit later.
Sure.
So that's how that got in there, and that's why Mr. Sands is in there. And the connection with the Philadelphia Chamber Music, because that's where the premiere took place.
And just by amazing coincidence, we are going to play this piece for the Philadelphia Chamber Music Society tomorrow. So,
Again.
yes.
Yeah. Well, anyway,
Well, you know, I hear someone's cell phone ring going off, and this might be an amusing thing to add into our discussion, which is music has many uses. And you might notice that this computer here is equipped kind of as a music stand, and that's because you are going to see this on the stage very soon. This is my music stand, and I'll be reading off the part that you see up on your screens. And the way we do that is with a foot pedal that turns the pages. So you press this side, and it turns, that's page down, and this is page up. And I might add that this is a totally homemade pedal, which was a development over the summer, because I hated feeling like I had a bought pedal that I really couldn't repair. And this I can go to Radio Shack and make another one.
Yeah. Have you ever missed a page turn?
Oh, I miss it, and that's the, you know, the first design of these electronic page turners, believe it or not, went one direction. Now, you see, what's very important is if I make a mistake, I just go right back.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But what this is getting at is with a little bit of electronic fascination, we were enjoying the fact that when my cell phone rings, it does this. And that, of course, is something you're going to hear about 1 minute from the end of the string quartet. And that is, by the way, a chord with all 12 pitches in it.
Yeah.
It's magnificent open sound.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that said, I guess we were supposed to say now, shall we turn off our cell phones?
Yeah.
But should we look at the beginning, or what would you like to do?
Well, I tell you, I'd sort of like, there is an introductory section, and I quickly will dispense with that. Is it still up there?
Yeah.
You know, there's something, it's unusual. The word idea does not often appear in connection with music. Ideas are supposed to be in literature and some other of the arts, but musical idea is kind of a strange idea to, but of course, the way ideas manifest themselves in music so that they are memorable, are there either they are themes, that can be an idea, or shapes that are so instantly unusual, creative, that can be an idea, you know. So in this case, I started with this, you know, 10 minutes before I started writing that cello note, I didn't know what the hell I was going to do, but I came up with this, who knows how inspiration works. And when I wrote this little idea, which is about 6 bars long, I said, gee, this is rather nice, and it's somewhat distinctive, and I'd like the audience to hear it more than once.
Would you like me to play it from the CD?
Well, we could play it from the CD, and then the repetitions, the second and third version of that are slightly different.
Right.
Because I always like to do near variation or near repetition, I do direct repetition also, so that this is heard and so that the idea becomes, because we all do better when we hear something a second or third time. I mean, that's just automatic. You could play
Should
a
we
little.
play it? Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
You see, to me, that dramatic interruption of the viola is the essence of the idea.
The repetition.
Insane. Now the third time. And you know, we can talk about having an idea or a theme, or, you know, you cannot one day get up, today I'm going to write a great idea, a great theme, you know. Ain't that easy, you know. So, you know, you write a lot of music and you hope that you find something that's a little bit special, especially against the whole history of music, you know.
Well, if I can just add with something interesting, you know, these 3 opening sort of
Statements.
scenes, yeah, it sort of sets something up. Of course, what it's setting up is this right here.
Well, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and what I was going to say as a performer is what you're seeing there, and I love this process for us as players, because we start with the score, and for us at first, in a sense, we can see some features of how it's put together, maybe even details, but it doesn't have any life yet.
Yeah.
And we don't really know where it's headed. And then there's this, you learn it, you're playing the notes, and then there's this amazing moment. And I think I remember calling you on the phone, and I said, oh, I just was saying, you know, this is just a great piece. And I remember, not that we started out with that conviction that it would be, but there's a moment where those just black dots become something living. And I think that's one of the most, you sort of probably see it the other way around. You're sort of, they become living before they become black dots. But for us, it's the other way around. And this next melody that we're looking at in the score there, you see me just holding these notes. But what's going to happen is it's going to unfold in this fantastically expressive arch. And this was just thrilling to realize that that's actually what this music is going to do.
Let me tell where this, I mean, it's very hard to always know where a particular inspiration comes from. But in this case, it has something to do with a marvelous piece by Dvorak. Which quartet is it that has this incredible adagio?
I can show you that.
You can show everything. There's a whole library here.
A little bit crazy, but indeed, let me do that. It's such a wonderful piece. Let me, if I moment that, there we go. And this is an ironic thing because this had to be assembled from parts, this score you're about to see, and it was, so that's what we used. There we go.
What it is the longest pedal point that I know of, except for some works by Bach, maybe, where the cellist in this Dvorak quartet sits on an F sharp for, I don't know, something like almost 2 minutes.
Well, you can see it's there. That's where it starts there, and then it goes this page, and this is a very slow tempo, mind you.
Yeah.
And then on and on
and on
and on.
And I learned this. I discovered this piece when I was 14, and I was just amongst the thousands of pieces I became obsessed with. This was one of them, and I finally, you know, 60 years later, I'm going to do something with that idea of this pedal point sitting there. Now, I have to say, this is 12-tone music. Don't hold that against me, but anyway. And so, but my 12-tone music is always with a lot of tonal innards, tonal underpinnings, tonal allusions. Even triads occur in it, and one can do that without breaking the 12-tone idea. So what I then came up with is to put against this cello note, which goes on forever, to have the violin play a quite beautiful tone in conjunct motion, no big leaping things, but it gets more and more excited, and that long melody eventually reaches a climax. And then for the second violin and the viola, playing mostly double stops, I do the rest of the harmonies, the rich harmonies that I wanted as the so-called accompaniment of the violin. And the trick was that the second violin and viola, this took me a bit of time, has to connect somehow with the four notes, the first four notes of my 12-tone roll. So everything in the second violins and viola is a kind of kernel or thematic idea of the whole piece, because those first notes in that row is what, of course, I use all through the piece. But here I isolated it for a specific purpose. So that makes those harmonies. I wish we could play that. But play a little bit of your tune on the violin.
Sure.
Yeah?
So
Is this a Stradivarius?
This is the Goldberg Guarneri del Jason.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, and it repeats itself. and it builds to a big climax. And then I had the idea of taking that same music, doing something very unusual to it. Once the climax, the high point had come, I take the music back down, and then I decided I want to do this again, but with something entirely different happening in it. Because what happened then was there's this adagio music, and it gets interrupted by a very soft, fast, swirling kind of music. If you could just play, for example, the second violins, you know, and
yeah. So Chris ends up.
Yeah. So when the adagio music comes back, the adagio music is the longest per section. I interrupt it many times, but what happens is that the fast-moving music gets longer and the adagio music gets shorter. In the meantime, the adagio music is exactly the same as what you heard the first time. So it's another interesting way of doing variation or repetition. You know?
And if I might add, as players, it's interesting when we encounter certain markings in a score that are strict or that seem to be quite free. But here we realized, as we worked with you, that you really wanted the one idea, this sort of this very quick idea, and then these appearances, as if the two were two cards of with different holes sort of moving in front of each other. And what happened to us was, of course, when you're trying to do that, and you can see that on this page, if you see tempo 2, tempo 3, tempo 2, tempo 3, tempo 2, tempo 3, tempo 2, tempo 3, we got used to making the alternations, but we realized once we were together that you really wanted those to be so fantastically strict, the way they switched from one to the other.
Because I wanted to be felt absolutely as inexplicable interruptions.
Yeah.
Why are you interrupting this adagio music, you know? And so therefore, I told them, you must almost be able to make your mind say that you don't know that the adagio music is going to get interrupted. And of course, that takes complete timing. Where did I steal that idea from? From Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. Because he did that in the opening of the piece, near the opening, where he had this incredible music on about, 2 minutes in. And it's like he had written this music which involved 50 instruments at least, and he had this idea of interrupting it abruptly, and the abruptness of the interruption is so dramatic because now instead of 35 instruments, there's suddenly only 4, and playing a very quiet, undulating music, and for only 2 bars, and then the other music comes right back. So Stravinsky often said, if you should steal a lot of music, just be sure to steal from the best people, you know. So I think I did that here. But that was hard for them because the end of the adagio music and the incoming noodling music had to be like 1/8 in a very fast tempo. And at first they couldn't do it in time.
Yeah, we would tend to make what felt like a transition between one
and
the
then
other.
it didn't sound like an interruption.
That wasn't the idea.
Yeah,
that wasn't the idea. So we'll do our best tonight.
Yeah,
we'll
see how
see if we can get it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's sort of the main point of the first movement. I'm so enamored, amazed at the great string quartets of the history, where all the 3 or 4 movements are completely contrasting always, you know. I hear a lot of music today, not just string quartets, where many of the movements sound almost alike. You know, one is marked adagio and the other one is marked presto, but they somehow sound. So just to show you that sort of dramatically from this languorous, slow-moving music, play a little bit of what you have. This, I even wrote in here, wildly driven. This is the most frantic, crazy, complex, almost pointillistic music. And just play, play your part. Yeah. Now the thing is, you know, there's a lot of fast music. Mendelssohn wrote a lot of wonderful fast music, but in those cases, the music was organized vertically. Everybody did the same thing. Here, the four instruments are all doing their separate things, and it's the continuity of the four different ones doing similar things, but never together. And that makes the piece, of course, pretty difficult.
Should I play a little bit of it?
Yeah, play a little bit.
By the way, what I'm playing from is the live performance of this piece that is on that disc.
Yeah.
And this is how that same section I just played for you.
That's pretty crazy music. Some people, what the hell, that's no music, you know. But here's the point. I interrupt that because play the next section where suddenly the mood changes again to those.
Yeah,
those.
This one?
Yeah, right, yeah. Play the.
I'm playing over here at the meno mosso here.
And then do the second violin. Yeah. So complete. I would like to throw a lot of contrast into, you know, constant variation. One of the most interesting things about music is how we can use that which is absolutely predictable, because we kind of know the style and certain conventions have occurred for a long time, and so you know sort of what's coming. But then the wonderful thing is with Beethoven, Brahms, all those great composers, suddenly there's something that's so different, so unexpected, so I think a lot of the greatest music is that which combines the predictable with the totally unpredictable, you know, and that's what moved music forward, you know. So that was, I was playing that game in this piece. Now, I mentioned earlier about this request by Mr. Sands for me to make some allusion to Mozart. And I got to about halfway through this scherzo kind of piece, and I said, well, listen, I mean, I've really got to, I was still resisting to the idea, but I better do it. You know, Brian commissioned this work and so on, so on. So I finally found this, and then as I was about to integrate Mozart's quotation, very subtle, by the way, of course, nobody knows the Kerschel 22 anyway, so it wouldn't recognize, it wasn't a G minor symphony, I can assure you. Because when I do these quotations or allusions, I do it very subtly, and most people don't even hear them. You wouldn't know this if I didn't tell you about it. But anyway, here's what happened. I was about to just do this. Now, wasn't one of the performances, it wasn't the premiere, that you had to play at the Beethoven House in Bonn?
That wasn't us, but that was the Juilliard Quartet.
Oh, that was the Juilliard, of course. I forget now. The Juilliard commissioned it.
That's right.
Yeah, I get this request about Mozart, and you know, a week later, Daniel Schley, the then director of the Beethoven House birthplace, says, you know, Gunther, you know, Beethoven, and they're going to play it here, and it'll be the first European performance. Why don't you do something also about Beethoven? I said, you gotta be kidding. I've just got through this idea of maybe doing Mozart. So, but Daniel's a dear friend, and he, you know, and I finally said, well, that could be interesting. If I'm going to do Mozart, I might as well also do Beethoven. So you will hear, if you can hear it, because again, it's very subtle, you'll hear a quotation from the Waldstein Sonata.
Opus 132.
And the 130,
oh, okay,
yeah,
sorry.
and the 132 String Quartet.
Yeah.
And that one you'll probably hear. It's one of the most magic moments in that string quartet. It's called the Dankgesang. But anyway, I do these things, as I say, more or less hidden, because a while I may use the specific notes of Beethoven or Mozart, I then camouflage it with the other stuff that goes on around it. Sometimes, you know, so heavily that you almost can't hear the quotation. But so I don't know.
Let's see if we can. So what I can certainly play for you.
Shall we save that for tonight?
Well, sure, but I can.
But here's what I don't want. You know, I always wonder whether I should mention this business, because I'm quite sure that if I didn't talk about this, you wouldn't know anything about this. But when I talk about it, then people, oh, well, I've got to listen for that. When is that going to happen? That Mozart, you know, and of course, then they're not listening to the piece anymore. They're just waiting for this moment. So we'll see see what happens. Let's save it, you know. So then, well, I played, by the way, do play the Mozart.
Sure.
It's
sure.
For what was it, 7-year-old kid or something?
Yeah.
This is Beethoven already. Those tritones in there and jumping, you know, an octave and a half. How did he come up with that? Boy,
And of course,
he must have been mad or something.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
And again, what's so nice here is we get, if you see it on the score here, we get 3 repetitions of this.
Oh, yes.
Each one with a completely different casing, as it were, which propels us into this wonderfully floating passage.
Oh, you know, I tell you what, let's just play this one for now. And
sure.
the Beethoven you'll have to do on your own.
Okay. Play the
The 3 of them.
Oh, sure,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Well, of course.
No, I mean on the recording.
Oh, on the recording, yeah. Well, it might just take a second to find it, but it shouldn't be too hard. So here we are. I will take a guess.
Modern
It's
technology,
right here.
amazing.
There it goes. Yep, I think I was pretty much right on.
Here. Poor Mozart, he never thought he'd be subjected to 12th tonalization. But isn't that amazing? You know, so then the third movement is, again, totally different. Oh, by the way, the scherzo part, the insane music comes back, because this whole middle section is, you know. And then in the last movement, I wanted to, again, have a maximum contrast, and there are a couple of things that were important, and I wanted to show. And that's the difference and distinction between playing on the string instruments with vibrato and without vibrato. And so a lot of this slow movement is involved with that. And one has to sort of almost exaggerate the vibrato, because we're so used to vibrato as a natural thing. But to show that suddenly there's no vibrato, yeah. You know, it takes a little bit. The other thing, show that technically.
Yeah, I mean, when this starts out, I think it's pretty easy to see that, well, it's maybe not so easy to see, but you see the NV, that stands for non-vibrato, and then, of course, vibrato, that's a little easier to see that that's vibrato. So when I start this movement, I'm very, very pure tone, and you notice that the other instruments come in with vibrato. And then, once I've sort of heard their chord, I join them, and then we cut it off.
Yeah. And I play around with that quite a bit. The other thing was that I believe that maybe my greatest interest and maybe strongest strength, can you say that? Yeah. Is that I'm very harmonically oriented. I know from my earliest years, harmony just fascinated me and still does, and I love rich harmonies. And so I also became so involved with jazz, because jazz at least 50 years ago, was very involved with very rich harmonizations. So what I did here specifically, a kind of slow march music, where the 4 strings play 8 notes all the time, 8-part chords, which gives a tremendous intensity, especially when you can vibrate on the double stops, which is harder, you know. But it gives it a terrific richness and warmth and intensity.
If I might just show one of those, if you see this one right here, can you see that on the screen? That's fortissimo, vibrato. Each one of us is playing a double stop.
Yeah.
In just my case, it becomes... But when you add 4 of those together, of course, what you get is this just tremendous density of sound.
And by the way,
It's
it eats up 8 of my 12 notes every time.
That's right.
A pure technical point. Really. But anyway, so those were the 2 main ideas of that piece. And then...
Do you want to talk about this middle
What,
section
the storm section?
Well, it's sort of, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, in this, there's a middle section which is very quiet. And again, I love interruptions, but this one is not sudden. But I also have used this idea, which I stole from Verdi's Otello, where in the last act, she's praying, and she sings the famous Ave Maria. And then suddenly a storm arises outside, and the scene is interrupted. And the storm in Verdi's music lasts only about 15, 20 seconds. Wow. And when I played Otello, maybe at the Metropolitan Opera, where I was principal horn, I must have played it 89 times, and I, fascinated with this piece, and particularly that moment. So here, I decided to suddenly interrupt this quiet music with a sudden summer storm. And as we all know, they go by very fast, they're very intense, and they explode, and then suddenly they're gone again, So
I guess the storm gets to its
full just
speed
when we
here.
get to that, so you don't say, what the hell is that doing in there?
And it's funny, I don't know if it's intended this way, but there's a wonderful symmetry in the way all this works, because when we have that stately, rise in the first movement, and then that very quick music that contrasts with it, and then we come back to the slow, then, of course, as you already saw in the second movement, this wild energy, and then the much, much slower, and back to the wild. And here again, this stateliness with this sort of floating and slightly crazy, and then back again we go.
And then at the end of the piece, there's a surprise, which we're not going to talk about.
I won't turn to that page. I realize we've talked for a while, and the concert will come not too long from now, but I suppose it might be nice to just take a few questions if you have any.
We'd love it.
And
30 seconds of stunned silence. What? We're supposed to think?
Yeah, what's your question?
I just wondered if you Gunther would share any of any of his delights or in his connoisseurship of recorded French horn music in just classical repertoire, I guess.
Do you have any
some
favorite
treasures.
recordings of French horn?
Oh my goodness. Several thousand? You mean the recordings or the music? Oh, that makes it even harder, because so much of the horn music is not played all that well. I mean, I have hardly ever heard a performance of the Brahms Horn Trio, one of the great horn pieces, of course, which is actually played the way Brahms intended it to be played, because what you don't probably know what I'm talking about is he took a lot of melodic ideas, themes, which should have been, let's say, starting on a downbeat. Guess what? Brahms, most people don't know this. He was almost as much as Charles Ives obsessed with the idea of shifting a conventional musical idea and putting it in the wrong place in the bar. Now, you still, and that's very interesting, because that's similar and analogous to the idea of a hemiola, where you have two different rhythms competing with each other. In this case, you have the difference between the shifted melody being in the wrong place, and yet you still have to observe the meter of the music. So in the beginning of the Brahms Horn Trio, it's 2/4, but it starts on the upbeat, and what makes it, and Seymour, you know this, the piano doesn't play the first beats. So the pianist really should sort of try to play as if it were a second beat, and that's very hard to do, especially when it's just an isolated note. So instead of the music being played da-dee, da-da-dee, da, it's always played da-dee, da-da-dee. That's wrong. That's plain wrong. And I listened once to 35 recordings of the horn trio to just find out what everybody did. And I didn't hear one where that was correct. Now, there's many other things about it. So you asked me an impossible question. But I don't know. I'd have to think a lot about that.
By the way, what you're seeing on the screen is one of the unbelievable number of treasures that are in this library of the Brahms horn trio in the manuscript.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I'm wondering about the interplay when you said, you know, that the four players don't follow each other as much, but they have a certain independence. How that feeds into the dynamics of the group, how the group reacts, the individuals in the group react to perhaps a little bit more independent lines in this piece versus other pieces. Does playing this piece change?
Answer that,
Yeah, you know.
I mean, this is nothing new, of course.
Yeah.
Because this kind of fragmented or, you know, complex music has been around for 100 years now. So,
Sure.
you know,
But, you know, in terms of,
but-
not specific to this, but just in general, does it change the dynamic when one plays this in terms of the four?
well, I
people in the
tell
group?
you what, the really simple answer is to do exactly what the composer wrote in terms of the dynamic. Of course, the rhythms and the notes, you take that. But if, for example, in this sort of wildly gyrating music, if one of those little inserts from, let's say, the viola, if that is suddenly too soft, and does not match the intensity of the previous three events of that, then that's already a problem.
Yeah, it's like a.
And that will destroy the continuity. Yeah.
You know, I called up a score here, which was something, looked at it working with Lewis Lockwood for a class that he did at Harvard. And we were looking at this. And what I have to say is, you know, our technique in the Borromeo Quartet of using the computer, the only purpose for that is so that we can see the full score. And what's very interesting to me is that the subject that's being talked about here, where the composer is envisioning somehow or capitalizing on the way four instruments can contradict each other in a sense, or do anything in between agreeing and, you know, all of the various relations of dialogue that could exist. What's been very, very interesting for us is that we realize when we're looking at the score that so many of the traditional pieces that we often hear sounding very convincingly homogeneous, in fact have markings that are asking quite the opposite. And what I wanted to show you is one that seems so quiet. This is from Beethoven's harp quartet. And where I'm playing is right down here. This is, the cello starts going, and in the upper, I think you can see us. Now, you notice how all of us are in parallel chords, basically. We're all in a similar texture. Many groups will say, okay, well, we should unify our bowing. We should do the same bowing. Well, if you just look even briefly at what Beethoven's actually put in the slurrings of
And
these
phrasings,
parts,
yeah.
phrasings, in fact, he's asking explicitly, energetically, for the opposite. He's saying, no, I want every part to be doing exactly this.
Yeah.
And so even
And
in
not
this,
smoothing it
no,
out.
and
yeah.
not homogeneous.
Yeah.
And as you can see, there's absolutely no doubt about that when you look at this manuscript. This takes a lot of energy to create that much variety in the way the parts are marked. And so, in fact, what's been interesting is that very issue of what we're talking about. You know, it came up in reference to the second movement where it's so energetic. Here, it's pianissimo. It's as soft as we can play. And yet, it's asking for exactly the same thing.
And that's harder to do in the pianissimo,
That's right.
actually, because it has to stay within the pianissimo or the piano.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
And of course, the benefit of playing off the score and, of course, seeing the manuscript is when you see it in the manuscript here, you really see that the intention was not debatable. It was very energetic, very defined, vital intention. And of course, what happens is when everyone is looking at that, they all have the confidence to actually make the most of those differences and try to explore what they mean instead of feeling a little guilty that they're not quite with their colleague.
When did you make the transition?
Well, I made the transition in 2007. I saw, actually, you were just with the wonderful person, Christopher O'Reilly, who does the From the Top radio program. And he and another pianist we know, I noticed they were using computers to read music. And of course, quartet players have for generations, and I mean, conductors never had to give away the full score. And pianists, despite the fact that their hands are quite busy, also have insisted on having the full score in ensembles. But string players always think, oh, I wish we could have the full score. Well, I finally realized that the computer would allow that to happen. And I do have to say, on this level, our group is discovering constantly that it is just one surprise after the other in terms of the and you see, this is such a hidden issue. It seems so tiny. This is 2
so
seconds
subtle,
of music. And yet, it's so decisive. And we have to deal with it when we see it there on the page. If I might just show you, because it's just so wonderful to look at it, tonight we'll also be incorporating this other manuscript, which is Schubert's Death and the Maiden. And this, again, I just will show you one thing that is just so wonderful to see. The last page of the manuscript, unfortunately it's incomplete, is a great variation where the cello is started out in triplets, and it's pianissimo, and it's very haunting, and you see he gets to this big arrival. That's what we're doing on top. And what I love is this, if you look underneath all these scratches, he started with the idea of the cello going and continuing what it had already been doing. But I don't know exactly what happened, but you can sort of see that somewhere in there he said, no, that's not what the cello is going to do.
You're not playing off this score that has all those directions.
I actually will be, but but you know what? Of course, he came up
Actually, he
with,
knows the music, you know.
Yeah, it helps when it's
No, but in terms of, does having that undertone that's been scratched out affect?
Oh yes, because the idea, which is replacing it here, which it almost, you can see it coming out of his brain, is this. This just fantastic cello idea. And it's as if you just see the moment where he was like, okay, now I know what to do.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe as a composer you see it a little, you know, it looks a little differently.
Absolutely, of
but,
course.
yeah.
It could even happen in my music.
I see one more question. Maybe we should stop soon after that. But
Mr. Schuller, I wanted to take this up. First of all, it's just a real honor to have you here tonight and to get this chance to hear you talk about your own music. And so thank you for being here. I want to take advantage of your knowledge and personal experience with many of the major figures in 20th century music to ask you about one whose currency has kind of been down in the last 30 years or so, Schoenberg, and his 12-tone method.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you said this is an influence in the quartet we'll hear tonight. Do you, I mean, if you ask people these days, I think they see him as a figure like Marx or something. He had a failed idea.
A monster.
Right.
Yeah.
What does the 12-tone method kind of give to your music as a composer? How do you think it maybe helps you, or what do you get from it? Do you see younger composers?
Do you have about an hour?
Well,
no, I'll try to do this quickly. Look, it is true that when Schoenberg, by the way, why he got to 12-tone is that when he and Stravinsky in 1909, 1910, 11 reached the world of atonality, both of them got scared because they suddenly saw this huge vista, and there were no more rules, no rules of behavior, let alone strict rules. And they said, my God, how are we going to organize our music now with all that other tonal functionality gone? And Schoenberg actually stopped composing for about 6 years. Stravinsky changed dramatically from the Rite of Spring to the Histoire des Soldats. So then came neoclassicism, okay. Now, and Schoenberg then being sort of this Germanic mind, you know, you got to think about things and organize things and come up with theories. It's part of their tradition. He finally came up with this idea of organizing the 12 notes of the chromatic scale, which had not been used in a totally free chromatic way, each note independent. And he organized it and said, but this was the big mistake that he made. But he caught on to it very quickly and changed it. He said, one should not repeat one of the 12 tones until they had all been played. That was, I mean, he still wrote some pretty remarkable music like the Woodwind Quintet and some piano pieces and so on. But that was a restriction which just was too binding, too mechanical, too whatever. And within 3 or 4 years, he saw that this just could not be, it would lead to a kind of, as I say, almost mathematical music without any feeling. And he decided, a simple idea, he said, okay, I'm going to take the 12 notes and I'm going to put the hexachord, the 6 notes, will be the melody, and the other 6 notes will be the accompaniment. Boy, did that loosen it up immediately, because now you actually had, okay, you still had the 12 notes, none were repeated, but you could use them not just in a linear way, but in a also harmonic way. Now this is, what is it, 70, 80 years ago, 1925? Yeah, I'm 86, no, it's many years ago. So since then, there's been more loosening up of the 12-tone concept. And I can't go into that, but it has much more to do, not so much with the counting of the 12 notes and all that BS. It's a matter of preserving, if you want to, you don't have to do this, you can write tonal music, you know, to preserve a kind of total chromaticism. Because Wagner and then Schoenberg and the other composers who came along showed that chromatic music, which had been coming into music more and more, even in Bach, there are sometimes chains of dominant ninth chords, you know, 10 in a row in the St. John Passion. So composers were edging towards this chromatic thing all along, and so finally in 1909, 10 it came. So for me, it's more about preserving the chromatic intensity of the music and depth of that, because that's obviously, in some sense, richer than just C major music. But in my case, and maybe I'm onto something, to also integrate into my 12-tone music and my 12-tone row has in its tonal elements. Now that is not new, because that's exactly what Alban Berg did. And the interesting thing is, between the three Viennese composers, Berg, Webern, one of the things that makes that music seem to me very important and great to me is that those three composers do not sound alike at all. And when Stravinsky became a 12-tone composer, he sounds different again. And now every 12-tone composer that still are around, it's all different. And I have now used the same tone row since 1976. I've now written 47 pieces with the same row, and I can swear to you not one piece sounds like any other, except I have established a language, my language, through that. So this is a very open field. It's just that Schoenberg did, look, one can excuse what happened, because if you invent something, you may not necessarily invent it perfectly the very first time. And we all learned from that. So that's some part of the answer.
Thank you for going.
Yeah.
Well,
And
Nick,
listen, ultimately, look, every note I've ever written is first in my ear. So the 12th tone is a kind of a technique or system or idea where we try, where the main purpose of which is to preserve the atonal integrity or the inner connections of all that music. Obviously, if a whole piece is a 12-tone piece, then all of the music in that piece comes out of that thing, which we used to call a theme. Now we can call it a row. So that's really all it is. And it does give you that control. I have to add immediately as a footnote, and we're going to end, of course, one doesn't have to do it that way. There's a lot of atonal music which is not 12-tone. Some of it is very good, and some is not very good. And all musics have the capacity of being either very good or not. So, you know, all these labels are dangerous, you know, and can lead to prejudice. And
well, what I will say is from our perspective, it's been amazing experience to become part of this language and its 12 tones.
Yeah.
Because it's a just unbelievably richly expressive piece, and I hope that we'll be able to bring that across to you in a short time now as the concert approaches. And it's been such a pleasure to be here tonight.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and we'll look forward to showing you.
this has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.